And I think one of the biggest problems that we're currently dealing and facing with right now is how children are being seen as adults and responded to as such. And how many incidents are we currently seeing throughout our society, within our small communities, where young people are treated a particular type of way because of their aesthetics. And I know that most definitely was something that I always kind of experienced. I was always tall and big at one point, and every kind of interaction that I embarked on, I was always seen by adults as somebody that was way more older than I was, but essentially I just was a young child that was trying to navigate my way through life. And when young people get given these particular labels within society, and especially when they're put older than they actually are, sometimes it's very difficult when we're trying to empathize and sympathize with children and young people that are genuinely going through problems, and also throughout our organizations, how they sometimes get overlooked. And the last important part of the literature that I argue that's oftentimes overlooked is the role of social media. And this is where my expertise and my research essentially sits, with understanding the role of technology and the role of media in its way in which young people understand, and also the wider society and how they understand and respond to these particular issues. And I think it makes perfect sense that despite that we talk about that historical lens of where we're at in terms of the why, because all this does is explain the why. Why do we see more young people engaging in violence? Why do we see more young people engaging in gangs? Why do we see more young people joining groups that are involved in the far right? Why do we see more young people joining terrorist organizations that may be involved in religious extremism and ending up in places like Turkey and then going on to places like Syria? Why are we seeing more and more young people engaging in different behaviors? It's important that we understand not only through that historical lens, but we understand where we are today. And I think we have to also talk about what's happened in the last 2 years and how COVID-19 has exacerbated all of these issues. So if we were worried over the last decade and the debate that we were having as a consequence of racism and trauma and fear and austerity and gentrification and poverty and then reactive interventions and social media and damaged relationships between the police and so on and so forth, all social media has done, added with COVID-19, has exacerbated these issues. And that's partly why many of us in the room would probably agree that the impact of COVID, what we've seen within the wider society, and especially as a personal reflection, is it's almost kind of created the highlight moment around social inequality. The haves and the have-nots. That's what COVID-19 has essentially showed me. Those that have, those that can, and those that have the opportunity or the privilege to be able to do things versus a wider society that struggle, or wider society that can't. And just think about the debates that have been taking place as it relates to something as simple as the vaccination programs and the communities that rejected or potentially were cynical or were particularly optimistic about potentially taking a jab, and look at the backlash, what was going to happen, and look at the threats within the NHS and social care and the impact that would have created for specific communities and not necessarily the majority. But when we home in on children and young people, and there's been some research that's been conducted, it's not been extensive, by the way, but I know the National Youth Agency, I know that I was supporting a number of publications that came out. Some of you may have read those, but this is just a highlight. But there's two ways that I want us to look at this. Number one, to just kind of be aware of these are the kind of tenets of the vulnerabilities of our children and young people. But the second thing for me is about the gaps, because one of the things I don't want to do today is just talk about the problem, but I'm very much about talking about solutions, turning that talk into action. So this is going to probably be your most contemporary data that you're going to get. And the vulnerabilities of our children and young people have been heightened in the pandemic, coming out of that historical context that I've just mentioned and where we are right now. So the increased mental health problems of our children and young people, just look around of what's going on. Have you not noticed that young people seem to be more agitated, anxious, more young people are nervous because the things that are going on in their society, those children and young people that have been inside for such a long period of time and haven't really had much human interaction. We can talk about adults for a moment, and I even know many family members and friends that have struggled in the pandemic. What about children and young people? So whilst their mental health and well-being has been impacted, we also have to think about the young people that have been missing from education for long periods of time. Those young people that were out of school, those young people that maybe were excluded. What about also those young people that were going through those transitions? Those young people that were moving from year 6 to 7? What about those young people that moved from year 11 to either sixth form or to college? And in those particular timeframes when the pandemic was at its height, that those individuals oftentimes were not being engaged. So what about those young people, and then go back to the point about their mental health and go back to their issue around their well-being? But then you also had the issue around domestic violence and abuse and harm that existed in people's households. So then you had a lot of young people that, if you remember, especially in the context of West Midlands, in parts of Liverpool, in parts of Manchester, in parts of London, that there was loads of young people that were out and about in the wider community. Those young people were out and about in the wider community, and what was the ignorance of some things that were floating about in the media and also conversations that were taking place online. And the argument was young people were out and about, not following government guidelines, they're unruly, they don't want to engage, and so on and so forth. And to an extent, there may have been some categories of young people, possibly, but there was a vast groups of young people that were dealing with issues around violence, dealing with issues around all forms of abuse. And as a consequence of that, were being out and about. But what was happening is in relation to their vulnerability. You may remember there was a number of incidents that took place, let's say West Midlands in particular, where there were young people eating pizza outside a chicken shop, and those young people were being shot at and caught up in gang rivalry. Not because that they were being disobedient, because a lot of those children and young people were navigating their way in their community, not trying to be outside or inside, their households. But then also those young people that were not in education, especially for those that were not in mainstream education, who was engaging with those particular children and young people. And then to add parts to the wound, there was young people that didn't have access to the internet. So there was loads of discussions nationally about acute poverty, to the point where we even seen footballers and celebrities having to create charities and donate because we were in almost like a crisis. Because again, what COVID-19 did was show us that social inequality is greater than it has ever been before. So then do we blame the young people for the risky behaviors? You may remember the famous video that we all seen coming out of the pandemic, right in the middle of Hyde Park, young people chasing each other with long bladed weapons, Rambo knives. And we observe these particular things and we just think, oh, these young people are crazy. And we say these things, but let's put it in context of what's happened over the last 2 years, then added on to the 10 years of the conversation that we just had previously. But then what about the issue of homelessness? What about the issue of young people as it relates to self-harm and suicide? And I know that we've been observing more and more children and young people seem to be self-harming and committing suicide. And whether or not these issues have made it to the news headlines, we know that these issues exist within our community. Why? Because we talk about it. Why? Because we observe it. Why? Because we're having to be on the ground and deal with it. So when we go back to our previous conversation about lack of resources and being able to respond to these particular issues, then we understand why we have so much problems that we're faced with right now.
The course is the Working with Gangs and Serious Youth Violence Level 3 course. It's an accredited programme which is accredited through AIM, formerly known as OCN West Midlands. We have 8 different modules to the programme, which basically is designed to give you a holistic understanding of working with young people impacted by serious youth violence and gangs.
These programs are important because what we're trying to recognize in the country is that there needs to be a standard, and a standard around recognizing how do we respond to serious youth violence, how do we respond to all forms of criminal exploitation as it affects our children and young people and our wider families within the community.
I think the Gangs and Serious Youth Violence course was probably one of the best things I've done in the last decade, for sure.
It's been a great experience so far. I've met so many people from so many different backgrounds and professions, working really widely across the youth sector, and it's been really helpful to listen to other people's points of views and experiences.
It was the first course, it was a certificate that I'd had for a long time, something that I wanted. I now write programmes, so I've written a couple of programmes on gang awareness and prevention, knife awareness, self-awareness, bullying. So before I did the gangs course, if you would have asked me to do something like that, I would have told you, I ain't got a clue what you want about, how am I gonna do that? So for me, the course was amazing because it's just opened up lots of things that I didn't know that I could do, that I'm now doing.
Being an adult learner, number one, and someone who hasn't been in, necessarily formal education for a long time, coming into a course that had so many options to support you through your learning, it was quite clear when I started the course that the objective of the educators wasn't for me to just get through the course, but it was to make sure that the students understood and had a full understanding and a holistic understanding of the information.
I've been looking at courses to do with youth and gang violence for quite a long time now, and this one really stood out, A, because it's one of its kind, there's not many about, and secondly, the professionals that lead this particular course are outstanding in their field.
We work with a range of practitioners, people who are specialists within their fields, who have years of experience in working with young people that have their own specialisms as well.
Bringing people in with lived experience is a really important aspect, and that's something that's happened. I grew up in an environment where I've lived around serious youth violence and can say I've been a victim to that. Also having people from communities that are working every day in serious youth violence come in and deliver to the people on the course or the cohort. So I think it's unique in that sense because actually you're learning directly from people with experience.
The importance of having people like myself on this programme as recognised as one of the leading experts in the country around responding to serious youth violence, I think it kind of gives that USP to the course, that it means that the organisers that have developed this particular programme have really thought about who do we bring in to give those real insights.
I've always done little one-day courses and stuff like that, but yeah, they're nothing like this. This is the course that gave me more knowledge and more understanding of working with young people, especially serious youth violence.
I have not experienced a course like this before. I've been to uni, I've studied criminology, had probably two good lecturers, but this course was just different. It was like, I actually looked forward to like what the topics were, how I can apply it and stuff like that, and it was like a little family. It ended up being like a little family, everyone helping out each other.
This is the only qualification in the UK. In fact, we've been hard pushed to find this qualification anywhere in the world, and we know because we looked. There's no other qualification like it. It's a course that is very much rooted in the community. It's very much grounded around having that holistic understanding of actually how do you work with young people who are impacted by gangs and serious youth violence.
That's why this course will have people from the police force, from social workers, from people who are working as teachers, people working in PRUs, people who are in the youth offending service. Everyone comes to this course because there are no other courses like this.
I think a lot of professionals make an assumption as to what serious youth violence is, and I think a lot of professionals band children into the term gang, when actually there is a significant difference between children that are engaging in serious youth violence, gang members and organised crime groups.
We have two courses which cater for, I suppose, different types of circumstances. So we have our distance learning course, which enables you to study alone basically, go at this particular program. You get access to our portal, you get pre-recorded content, and you can just basically study this program by yourself. And that program is open all year round. The blended learning course currently runs once a year. So we usually start the course in and around April time, and it lasts until November, December. But the blended learning gives us the option to, work with other people and also get those lectures live. So that's whether that's live online or as well face-to-face. So it's that blended learning experience that we offer through our certificate program.